Hey everyone, it's me, Mitch. I'm one of the pastors here at Suncrest, and a happy new year to you. We're kicking off a brand new series of messages we are calling Practicing Spirituality. Let's get going.
How are we doing, everybody? Good. You know, I love to start with that question, and almost always you say good back to me, but I'm going to rewind this just a little bit, and in just a moment, I'm going to ask you how you're doing. And instead of feeling the social pressure to say, good, Greg, I want you to be honest with me about how you're doing. And I want you to choose just one word. The one word you cannot choose is good. You already used that one, right? And there's, of course, a variety of options for you. You could choose the word fantastic. That's even better than good. You could choose the word frustrated. I'm frustrated right now. Just be honest, I'm frustrated right now with life. You could say, I'm numb. I don't feel life in any significant way anymore. At least it feels that way. You could say you're grateful. You could say you're angry. You could say, you choose your word. Choose your word. But in just a second, I'm going to ask you how you're doing. And everyone collectively, so that your word will be covered up by the sound of everyone else, is going to tell me how you're really doing. Okay? So, how are we doing, everybody? Fair enough. One of my convictions is I want everyone who walks through these doors to feel like they can be honest, right? If you can't be honest here, if you can't be honest with yourself, if you can't be honest with God, then what are we even doing? There's no use in pretending in this space. And the truth is we're not all doing good. Some of us are. Some of us are doing better than good. And some of us feel different ways. And of course, the calendar just turned over, as we've been acknowledging. It's 2024. And one of the questions we ask ourselves, rightfully, I think, is to say, basically, do we want 2024 to look the same way that 2023 did in our lives, right? So actually, just as another practice here to kind of get us thinking today, set us up for the teaching series, actually, I'm going to go through a list of life circumstances, things that you'll be able to relate to. And all I want you to do as I go through this long list is to think, if 2024 is the same as 2023, am I good with that? Or, actually, do I need something to change in 2024? Okay? So, nothing out loud, you don't have to raise your hands, anything like that, but I do want you to reflect on each one of these words. Here's the questions. If your anxiety is the same this year as it was last year, is that good? Or does it need to be different? If the results you're producing at school or at work are the same this year as they were last year, is that good? Or does it need to be different? If your health, your physical health, is the same this year as it was last year, is that good? And give yourself credit. If it's good, it's good. Don't be shy about that. Or is it like, no, it really needs to be different? If your excitement about getting out of bed each day is the same this year as it was last year, is that good? Or is it like, no, that needs to be different? If your level of patience this year is the same as your level of patience last year, are you good? Is your family good? Or is it like, nah, that needs to change? If your level of sensitivity is the same to others, good, not good. If your level of anger is the same this coming year as it was this past year, maybe you're good on that, and we're good, but maybe not. I don't know. What about purpose? If you make as big a difference in the world next year as you did this past year, you'd be like, yep, I'm on track. Or does something need to change in that? What about your most important relationships? If you're married, certainly this is your marriage. If you have kids, it's probably with your kids. Circles of friends really matter. Boyfriend, girlfriend matters. If in your inner circle of relationships, if they're the same in 2024 as they were in 2023, you're like, yeah, that means life is good? Or is it like, nah, that needs some adjustment? What about your resilience, your inner strength, your confidence, your clarity, or your discipline? If 2024 repeated 2023, we feel good about that? Or is it like, nah, there's steps forward to take? Now, I ask you all of that because I want you to think about where you are in life right now and what possibly could be ahead for you. I want us to all think about it soberly to some degree. Because outside of a few extreme circumstances, no doubt that at least a few of you experienced it in life, most of us could probably look at last year and say, well, I know how we got where we got last year. I was a part of every decision that got made. I chose every action and strategy that I had available to me last year, and the things that I chose produced what I got. So if I want to produce something different this year, I'll have to make different choices and take different actions. And a big part of the series that I want to start this weekend is about you personally and kind of building out your life with the tools so that it can be different. So it can be more patient, less angry, more resilient, greater clarity, all of those things. They don't just come by snapping your fingers. They come from practices we put in our lives. But it's also pastoral for me while I'm doing this series. And I want you to hear this. There are some times when I'm teaching up here and I'm leading you to live the life that Jesus lived. But I also feel like I'm telling them to do something. Not only are they not going to do it, but they don't have any hope of doing it. Honestly, I know this. If I tell you, I'm like, you should love your enemy. You might even want to love your enemy. But if you haven't built out your life a certain way, you're not going to love your enemy. You should be quick to forgive. That's just a practice. But I know the moment I say it, not everyone can do that. You don't just snap your fingers and be able to forgive someone who really hurt you. You build that out in your life over time. And sometimes, even when I'm teaching you to do things that Jesus taught us to do, I feel like I might as well say, hey, go lift a 500-pound dumbbell, barbell, whatever. You have no hope of doing it because you aren't prepared to do it. And even in some ways for me as a pastor, that feels like, man, I'm not sure I'm really being helpful. I'm just probably making people feel guilty about things they're not doing that they couldn't do if they tried. And so I want us to talk over the next 4 weeks about practicing spirituality. Now, these two words are chosen very particularly. Spirituality, what do I mean by that? I mean that you experience God in your life in real ways day in and day out, that truly there's a spiritual experience going on for you, that you encounter God, you get prompted by God, you notice God in ways that are everyday. You know, there's a phrase out there that a lot of people use today. They say, well, I want to be spiritual but not religious. And I think some pastors get offended by that, but I don't get offended by that at all. I think I know what people mean. I think religious, in the way they're using it, means, well, there's a lot of rules, a lot of obligations, a lot of things I do, but I don't actually feel God. And I actually want to feel God. I want to have some experience with the spiritual realm and do what I think it can do for me without all the burdens of that religion tends to weigh on you. And I want that for you also. Spirituality, I mean this, from the Christian perspective, and of course that's the perspective that I think is true, there is a spiritual realm, and God himself is spirit. In fact, the Holy Spirit is God. And that means that our interaction with the spiritual realm is interesting. If you're not a Christian, if you'd say, I don't believe in Jesus, I haven't yielded my life to him, I don't trust him, then the Spirit, as it works on your life, the spiritual experiences you can have come from the outside. God, with his Spirit, is prompting you, is leading you, is even protecting you at certain times. There's a spiritualness to that. But for those of us who are followers of Jesus, the Spirit has gone from the outside to the inside. That God himself, the Holy Spirit, lives inside of us, and the promptings are trying to work their way out in our lives. And I want you to experience that. Like it's spirituality. But this is practicing spirituality. And practicing is an important part of the phrase. You know the nature of practice, right? There's practice, and then there's performance. And in some ways, when I say love your enemies or turn the other cheek, or if I'm in a conversation with you and you're engaged and I say, you shouldn't marry that guy, and you're just not strong enough to do it, it's because that's the moment of performance. But the practice hasn't been there in order to build yourself to be strong enough, resilient enough, clear enough, in order to actually live out the life that Jesus has for us. It's practice in the sense that it's not what everyone's doing. It actually goes against the flow. No one should expect the practices that I'm going to teach over the next 4 weeks are what everybody's doing, or what even everyone would encourage you to do. This is unique. It's countercultural. And it, of course, reflects practices that most people don't do. You would be weird to do them in all the best ways. And it is, hear this, practice. I took piano lessons when I was a kid. I think I'm the only person on the face of planet Earth who quit piano lessons and was glad he did. All right, everyone else, I quit, I wish I hadn't. Nope, I'm glad that I quit them. I was horrible. Practice, you start out not very well. You're fumbling, you're not very good at it, but you just kind of keep doing it, and it starts to feel like more of a rhythm in your life. You get better at it, and that's I think, a lot of times why people stop practicing spirituality, is they want to be awesome at it on day one. I'm like, well, give it some time, practice it, and you'll get better. And be okay with not doing it very well at the beginning. So this is practicing spirituality. It is experiencing more of God in everyday life. Now, the spiritual practices that I'm going to introduce to you are just 4 out of a long list of spiritual practices that are in the scriptures. And there's a book, in fact, if you were looking for a book that's, I think, the most helpful about spiritual practices, there's a book called The Spirit of the Disciplines by Dallas Willard. Had it referred to me again just last week by a good friend of mine. And he talks about how the disciplines or practices of our lives tend to fall into 2 categories, either abstinence or engagement. Now, think about this with me just for a moment. Peter, when he was writing his section of the New Testament, he said, be careful about giving in to fleshly lusts because it will war on your soul. Be careful about giving in to fleshly lusts because it will war on your soul. Now, that would be an important statement if anyone wrote it. And you might even not think of it entirely clearly. Like we think of lusts, especially when someone says fleshly lust, you might think about sexuality and lust, but it's so much more than that, right? It's all the cravings, all the appetites, all the desires that we have, most of which are healthy in some measure, but go overboard, and then we go overboard with them, right? Peter, do you know this about the story of Peter's life? He had a moment in his life where he wasn't strong enough. Where he had told Jesus, I won't deny you. I'm with you. If nobody else stands, I'll stand. And then he didn't stand. And I think when Peter is telling us, he's like, hey, be careful about the fleshly lusts in your life because they will war on your soul. He's saying to us, if you're going to be ready for the big moments in life, pay attention to these. What are the these are abstentions, right? We're not going to do them. So these are practices like solitude. It means abstaining from other people. And you think, why would you do that? A lot of life is healthy being with other people. Greg, don't you say that we're relational beings and that is a big part of it? Yes, I do. But in a healthy practice of spirituality, you and I will take some time for solitude. Why? Just to be alone? No. Because we understand that if we live our whole life around other people, our minds are shaped in a certain way when we're around other people that we cannot think about when we're alone. When we're around other people, we think about what other people think. We perform for other people. And the voice of God gets diminished and the voice of others raises up. So you and I have to find some time in our lives to abstain from other people and have a practice of solitude. So that in those moments, the only person we're listening to is God. We don't care about who's looking, who's watching, who's listening. We don't have to, we're alone. It's just an example. There are also spiritual practices that are engagement practices. This is when you actually step and do something instead of stopping doing something. In Romans chapter 12, it just says, practice hospitality. And that's what this is. You're just practicing hospitality. It's one of the, I don't know if you'd think of it this way, but it's one of the spiritual practices in our lives that every time you're around someone else, you lift them up. You make them feel better. You create a setting where they feel safe and encouraged and warm and loved. And like, if we do that, what's going on? Well, it's getting ourselves out of our own way and lifting someone else up. It's actually, if you let it be in a spiritual sense, a reminder of God's posture toward you, that he's hospitable toward you, that he's always coming to try to lift you up and set you on the right course and help you be strength and have your back and encourage you. That's who God is. It's just an engagement practice. But here's the fundamental question that we can't skip past if you and I are going to learn some spiritual practices and actually embrace them in our lives. The question is, do we want life in sync with God? Because it's possible that you and I want moments of spiritual thrill, but the spiritual practices in our lives, practicing spirituality, is actually about syncing up our life with God. And I want us to be honest about that, to say, do we really want to do that? I do have a survey in the room. I need you to raise your hands. How many of you, like when you were in high school, how many of you loved group projects? Good, 3 of you. Exactly what I expect. How many of you hated group projects? This is, everyone knows this, right? Now, why did you hate group projects? Just think about it with me. The reason you and I hated group projects could have been a variety of things. Number 1, I'm smarter than all the rest of them, right? That's how we think about it. Like, they're all idiots, and if they would just get, So it might be that I think I'm smarter. It might be, I don't think I'm smarter, but they have a way of doing it, and I'd rather we do it a different way. And I think we should do my way, not their way. It makes it very hard to do a group project. Sometimes it's not even that. It's just like, but the timetable they're on and the timetable I'm on, 2 different timetables. Right? I either think we should go faster than they're going. We got to meet this Saturday, not wait 3 weeks, or the opposite. This is, the coordination, syncing up with a group, that's a hard thing to do. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but life, for the follower of Jesus at least, is essentially a group project with God. And the reasons we don't like other group projects are sometimes the same reasons we actually don't want life to sync up with God. Now, if you think you're smarter than God, I'll let you just deal with that one on your own. Actually, that's part of the humbling part, is like, I know God knows better than me. But it's possible that God wants to do it one way, and I want to do life a different way. That's totally possible. And it becomes frustrating if I don't actually want to sync up with God. It could be that God has a timetable, and I have a timetable. And I'm trying to get God on board with my timetable, rather than me saying, you know what, actually I'd like to sync with his timetable. This is a fundamental question about life. Actually, over Christmas, I had this conversation with lots of people. So I may have had it with some of you, so don't feel like I only had it with you. Jenny and I have kids who are teenagers and young adults, and then, of course, we adopted a 3-year-old a couple of years ago. And when I would talk with families that kind of tracked with us through life with our older kids, they have teenagers and young adults. We were talking about Christmas, and, like, hey, how's Christmas? And then I would say something like, Christmas is more fun with a 5-year-old. And they would laugh, and they'd say, yeah, I remember that. I'm like, no, I'm serious. I mean, so this is just a little side note for how Greg Lee lies to his kids. I've always told my kids that Santa comes to our house one day early because I'm a pastor. Right? So we always open our presents the morning of Christmas Eve, and then we head out late Christmas Eve to go to our parents. And so now I have a new child to lie to about this, right? And his eyes are so big about it. He thinks it's the greatest thing in the world that I'm a pastor, so Santa can come a day early. I mean, I'm just telling you, like, having little kids makes Christmas more fun, right? So then when I'm in this conversation with these friends of mine, I say, hey, I say, you should adopt a 3-year-old. And as fast as people can, they're like, whoa, 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 no, 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 no. They sometimes even walk away from the conversation before I even get to have it with them. But what I know is I don't really think you should adopt a 3-year-old, most of you. I really don't. I'm just baiting them, okay? I have a place this is going. Because if they'll stay and keep talking to me after that, I'll say, you know what, I don't really mean that you should necessarily adopt a 3-year-old. And then I say, but if God led you to it, you would do it, right? I mean, let's just ask the question in the room. For everyone in the room, if God led you in the next coming weeks to adopt a 3-year-old, and it was from God, you knew it was from God, you would do it, right? Or not? I mean, this is just the honest question, and I want us to be honest in here today. You might be like, Greg, I'm not doing it. And then this is what I say. I say, listen, this isn't about adopting a 3-year-old. My question for you is, if God asks you to do something, if God leads you to do something that was not on your plan, and actually you're not sure you want to do it, are you going with your way? Or are you going with God's way? Do you even want to sync up your life with God? Because that is a fundamental question. And if you do, if you want to actually experience the voice of God, the leading of God, the Spirit of God in your life, then I have some practices for you over these next 4 weeks that I think will give you spiritual experiences. So, I have 4 practices over 4 weeks. What I want to ask you to do is to be here every week, and I want to ask you to practice each one of these practices just for the week we're teaching about it at first. And then after the end of the 4 weeks, I want you to pick one of the 4 practices to say, yep, that one's resonating with me. I'm going to carry that one through the rest of the year. And the first practice is to pace yourself. To pace yourself. This is the rhythm of work and rest in our lives. Let me kind of open up with the scriptures and then kind of lead us through the consideration of whether you and I would put this spiritual practice into our lives. I think we all can appreciate that God designed this world. He designed it with intention and with purpose. And in some ways, when he created the world, he was teaching us how to best live in the world. In Genesis chapter 2, the creation of the world, it says this. It says, by the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. And so on the 7th day, he rested from all of his work. God did that. I understand you may not think you need to rest. But God, being God, rested. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now this is really interesting because if you know how the Bible lays itself out, you know that Genesis chapter 1 through 11 is really a message from God to all of humanity. It's for all of us. And then actually starting in Genesis chapter 12 and for the rest of the Old Testament, God uniquely communicates with a group of people, the nation of Israel. And he gives them all kinds of commands and all kinds of ways to live. We can learn things about God from those passages, but all the rules, all the commandments from Genesis 12 through the end of the Old Testament are actually not commandments for you and I to necessarily follow, unless they get repeated in the New Testament. But this is before that. This is Genesis 2, and it's like, hey, God created the world this way. In Exodus chapter 20, just the next book over from the beginning of the Bible, we get the 10 Commandments. Now, this is a message just to the nation of Israel. It's one of the foundational 10. This is what it says. Remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You're starting to understand what I mean by pacing yourself. It means that you would look into the rhythm of your life and say, yeah, there is a time to work. And if I'm going to be a godly person, if I'm going to experience spirituality at all, I will also have to prioritize rest in my life. The passage finishes this way. Next slide. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Now, of course, I'm coming at you from a Christian spirituality standpoint, but this very principle is not limited to Christian spirituality, and plenty of people, even people who focus on productivity, have learned to appreciate this principle. Some of you no doubt have read the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He embraces this principle. One of his habits is actually called sharpen the saw. And his point is, if you're sawing and sawing and sawing, you're working and you're working, you're productive, and you never stop to step back, to rest, to sharpen the saw, then it actually decreases your productivity. There's a guy named Dr. Matthew Sleeth. He's written a book called 24/6 instead of 24/7. He's a doctor, he's a medical doctor, and he's telling us that we will be healthier beings. Your body will react to your life in a healthier way if you take one day off each week to rest. Of course, this is a principle that Jesus has reflected in his interactions. Do you remember the story of Mary and Martha with Jesus? One of them, Jesus is coming to their house. One of them does all the preparation. She's setting the table, she's fixing the food, she wants everything to be great for Jesus. She might even justify it by saying, I'm practicing hospitality. But her sister, she's not lifting a finger. She just goes and sits down with Jesus and chats it up. I mean, some of you just had Christmas dinners where the people who didn't help do the dishes, you were like, right? But this is the scene. And the people who were doing the dishes don't get the glory. Jesus says, Martha, you're working, you're running around, chicken with your head cut off. It's not good. Mary has chosen the better thing. And this is a question, because this will test your assumptions. I mean, if you don't want to sync up your life with God in his way, then you can go live like Martha. But according to Jesus, if you're going to have chances to listen for the voice of God in your life, you got to stop and not be so concerned with the presentation as with some quietness with God. Jesus himself would teach, and crowds, they would grow to thousands of people listening to Jesus teach. And it's so interesting. People would press in on him. They'd want a little more and a little more and a little more. And then what would Jesus do? He would retreat. Sometimes he'd teach from a boat so he could just row himself across the lake and get away from everyone after the teaching was done. And he wasn't meeting people's expectations. And most of us, you, certainly I, know what this feels like. I got to tell you this. I got an email the night of Christmas Eve. We had done 6 services. I had done 3 that day. Got in the van. We drove for 5 hours. I ended up at my in-laws' house a little short of midnight. I opened up my email, and I have an email from someone who was not happy with me. And essentially, I promise you I'm portraying this accurately. Essentially it was, Greg, you're not doing enough because you didn't do this thing I wanted you to do. It wasn't okay for other people to do it. You needed to do it. And I'm like, come on. But when people put pressure on you, a lot of us would have a notion to be like, okay, all right, I'll get back up on the horse. I'll go meet your expectation too, because rest, that can't be spiritual. But Jesus would say rest is spiritual. Jesus then would have encounters with Pharisees, and this was kind of the flip side of it, is the Pharisees held to this Sabbath rule very legalistically. Like they had lots of rules. It was a lot of work to keep the Sabbath. That was the point. And Jesus wasn't having that either. Actually, he ends up saying this. He says, it said to him, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. This is not legalism. This is not laying things on top of you that you have to do and do it in a certain way. When I start to describe rest in just a moment and what's acceptable for that, I want you to have a freedom of how to think about that. Jesus gives us that. But I also don't want to take so much freedom that we don't honor the principle of rest. And this is a really big deal. In our culture, American culture, productivity is rewarded, right? Actually, busyness is rewarded. If you talk to someone and you say, hey, are you getting your rest? And they say, no, man, so busy. I'm doing this and building that and accomplishing this. And most of the time we look at that person with actually kind of a sympathetic honor and be like, man, they're knocking it out of the park. This is the most breakable commandment that gets encouraged culturally that I know of. You wouldn't do this with any other commandment. If I was to go into you and be like, hey, are you being faithful with your wife? You're like, no, I'm busy with all these other women. Nobody's going to be like, oh, yeah, look at him. He's busy. But this is the culturally acceptable one, which feeds the idol, if we could call it that, which feeds the idol that you and I have for productivity, accomplishment, and building out our pride based on what we've accomplished, and even maybe how busy we are. We wear it as a badge of honor rather than an embarrassment that we're the kind of people who will not rest. So, how do I practice this spirituality? I'm going to give you 3 things that I want to ask you to do this week. Number 1, rest well for 1 day each week. Now, in an ongoing way, I want you to do this, but this week, everyone in this room, will you promise to me that you'll sync up your life with God and find one 24-hour period? It could be Saturday. It could be Sunday, sometime in the next 7 days. It could be from 6 p.m. one night to 6 a.m. or to 6 p.m. the next night. I'm not trying to be legalistic about it. I'm trying to say, I will honor God with the principle of rest and let rest give me room for spiritual experiences. You know, my dad built a great business. It was amazing. Hard work was one of the absolute pinnacle principles in our family. My dad made, that's probably the right word, made my brother and I work essentially full-time from 7th grade on. We'd come home from school, we'd get on our bikes, we'd go to the fertilizer plant, and we'd work until it was time to be off. My dad believed in work, and he integrated that in us, but my dad would not open his business on Sunday. It's a seasonal business. There wasn't pressure to open it on Sunday much of the year. But in that business, almost all the work of the year happens in 6 weeks in the spring and 4 weeks in the fall, and all of his competitors were open on Sunday. And I saw my dad, in some sense, pay a price for choosing to rest. Some farmers that weren't happy with him, they wanted their fertilizer that day. I also saw him keep employees that other people lost. There's something about taking 1 day each week to rest. But it's not so legalistic that it's just 1 day. It's a principle, right? So it's also resting well in some way each day. What do I mean by resting well? I mean, sit down with a cup of coffee. Take 15 minutes. Just think and reflect. If you want to pray, pray. If you want to read the scriptures. But don't have your phone. Maybe this best happens in the shower. You take an extra 10 or 15 minutes and you just let it be each day. You know, one of my habits, it's weird because I'm almost afraid to admit this to you, but Thursdays are full days. Here we are. I started at 6:30 this morning. But pretty much every Thursday, I go home at about 2 o'clock to take a nap. And I'm like, why am I embarrassed to tell you that? Because there's something in the water that wants all of us to just keep grinding. But the spiritual practice is pace yourself. And rest well for 1 block in each year. My family always took a summer vacation. And I thought it was awesome. And if you're a dad or a mom, but of course I think of it especially in terms of my dad and in terms of me leading my family. How can you do this week? You can get it on the calendar this week. You can start talking to your kids about it this week. You can even book the flights or the drive or the hotel or whatever it is this week so that you make sure this year does not go by without a block of stepping away from work and doing rest. We should ask the question, what is rest? What is rest? Well, rest is about trusting God with what is incomplete. That's why this is a spiritual practice. I know what the pushback is. I have it in my own life, and I talk to people about it all the time. Well, Greg, if I rest, the project's not going to get done. Somebody's got to do it. Yeah, I understand. That is exactly the tension. And your assumption is that the right move is to make sure the project is finished instead of aligning your rhythm with God. And I'm asking you to make the opposite decision. To say the project isn't going to win. The spiritual practice is going to win. And I will, in some sense, have to trust God that it didn't all get done. Trust him with the result of it. Trust him with it being 90% complete instead of 100% complete. Trust that he could fill in the gaps if the gaps need to be filled in, and trust that he would show me where the gaps actually didn't ever need to be filled in. That was just me and my pride driving at it. But this is a trust equation. If you want to say to me, Greg, I won't be able to get it all done if I rest one day each week, my only answer to you is, then I hope you choose to not get it all done. What is rest? Rest is about opening yourself to spirituality. In your everyday life without a rhythm of rest. Now, it isn't that God wouldn't speak to you, because God will constantly try to get your attention. But I've been in the rooms, the hospital room, where someone's laying there after a heart attack, and they said, well, I guess this is how God got my attention. I've been there, gotten the call when someone got served divorce papers because there's been no sense of pace or honor of the relationships in their life. And they finally say at the divorce paper spot, well, I guess God's gotten my attention. And I'm like, I don't want God to have to get your attention that way. I don't want it to have to be a blow up in your life in order for you to actually see and hear the voice of what God is trying to get your attention with. The practice of rest is what gives us room for God's ongoing voice in our life, for a true spiritual experience. I mentioned Dr. Matthew Sleeth's book a little while ago. This is what he says. He says, I don't try to define what rest is for a person. Rest for one of you might feel different than rest for another. He says, but I ask you to figure out what is work. What is work for you? And just don't do that for a whole day, every week. So, I'm going to close with two passages of Scripture, both stories from the Old Testament. The first is from Jacob. And in the book of Genesis, Jacob looks up after an experience, and this is what it says. It says, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. I got to tell you, in terms of my prayers for our church, my prayers for you this year, my prayer is that you don't get to the end of 2024 and feel like this. Well, God was around. Of course he's around. I have the sense that he was in this place, but I just missed it. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't slow down long enough. I didn't shut out the noise long enough. I didn't create any space for him Surely God was in this place and I wasn't even aware of it. The flip side of that is David, who writes this prayer in the Psalms. And I think this is a prayer that reflects this practice and also literally a prayer you could use when you take your rest each day. He says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me to the life everlasting." I hope that this week, everyone here will make sure to take one day of rest in the next 7 days. Make some space for rest within each day, and block a time of rest in your calendar for this year. And if each day it's helpful to you in your quietness, just start with Psalm 139. It says, "God, search me and know my heart. Test me and know the anxious thoughts within me. See if there's any offensive things in me and lead me in your path." This is the prayer. God, if there's your way and there's my way, I'd like to know what yours is.
We have all kinds of stuff happening this year, specifically during weekend experiences. We've got amazing music, awesome messages, opportunities for your kids with Suncrest Kids to learn and grow, birth through 5th grade. Monday nights are for students, 6th grade through 12th grade, and so much more. The way to learn all the details about what's going on in the life of Suncrest, and hopefully in you and your family's life, is by going to suncrest.org or downloading the Suncrest app. We can't wait to see you right here in St. John, Indiana at Suncrest Church.
Darkness run for cover, but the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders. I have resurrection power. Still the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. Oh, my praise belongs to you forever. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Oh, our God will This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive. This is my testimony. From death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
Every week, we pause everything we do, both in person and on demand, to focus on the love of Jesus during a time we call communion. It's where we take bread and juice in person, but go ahead and grab whatever food and drink you have available to you for your on-demand communion experience. We do this every week because everything we do is centered on Jesus. It's an opportunity for those of us who follow him to refuel, refocus, and realign our lives to live the kind of life that he lived. If you're watching this and you don't know what you believe yet, you're wrestling with your faith journey, you're trying to figure this out, I'm really glad you're watching. Suncrest is an amazing and a safe environment for you to wrestle with what it is you believe, alongside hundreds of other people wrestling with similar questions you might have. I'm going to put a timer, some scripture on the screen here shortly, and I want to invite you to take a moment, eat and drink when you're ready, and to pause and reflect. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Suncrest On Demand. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone who needs to hear this or you think would be interested in this, go ahead and hit the share button. And if you want to see more content like this from Suncrest Church, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. I hope you join us next week as we continue this series, and I hope that you experience the change that only happens from following Jesus. We'll see you next time.